So a lot of men are seeing something right now that I think a lot of them, if they haven't already kind of doubled down in this position that many men have where they don't see prospects for a relationship, whether it's focusing on their peace and solitude, whether it is just not seeing someone compatible with their standards, which standards on the basis of behavior, not physical stuff, not looks. But if it's not that, at the very least, giving them incentive to have very, very good discernment. Quite frankly, as they should, right? Because love without discernment will ultimately lead to destruction. But when I was around the age of 21, I had dabbled with these dating apps, in part because I was younger and more naive at the time, but because it just seemed like that is how people were getting to meet each other. That was how I would say probably 75 to 80% of the people I know that have gone on dates or been in relationships in the past 5 to 10 years, they were with women that they had met on dating apps, if not even a higher percentage. But it just seemed like that's kind of what the times were, which that doesn't mean that you should play those kind of games. It doesn't mean that you should participate in those things. I think this is a big part of why so many men are opting out, and a lot more than just dating, by the way. This whole thing is much more than just relationships when it comes to men opting out. But a lot of men who get on these dating apps, and myself included, when I dabbled with them, felt this need to constantly level up, really without the women having much accountability, if any at all. But men feeling like they are subpar, like they are not good enough, when, by the way, there's nothing wrong with them, when they are doing everything they should be doing with themselves. This heavy kind of pressure from women and from society, I'll put it that way, where they just feel like they're doing something inherently wrong. Now, this idea of leveling up, I say do it for yourself, for the people around you. Of course, not to go to these extremes where you have the vanity stuff that goes too far, where you have doing it for all the wrong reasons, the flashiness and the social media and that kind of stuff. But to uplift your family and the people in your circle is a great thing. That is an excellent thing. But when it comes to the dating apps, you look at what is rewarded on there. It is nothing that is genuine. So ultimately, what's happened is good men have been pushed away from dating, wanting to participate. And I'll go even further than that. Just men who are authentic, who are genuine, who are their genuine, authentic selves, have been pushed away from these kind of things because they don't want to have to curate some, extravagant bio or description or profile. They want to be their nonchalant selves. And I remember this was way before dating apps, but several years ago, when I was younger, you would have couples who were into the gym, you would have couples who were into anime, you would have goth couples, but people who had mutual interest. They had a connection with the person, much like a friend of yours having similar interests, perhaps. It was not purely about the image. And what people mean when they say, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, when they say dating feels transactional, it feels like a commodity, which is certainly the case. That is exactly what they mean. This whole keeping up with the Joneses kind of stuff, where you're constantly keeping up with what everyone else thinks. Now, that's no way to live your life. And the other thing, too, I want to say on this, not to go too off topic here, but people have talked about this idea of time going faster. And I've certainly felt that. I think we all have, quite frankly. But I also heard something very interesting, that during times of anxiousness, that time seems to speed up. When someone is dealing with anxiety, that time seemingly goes faster. And I think that dating apps, along with social media, are some of the main proponents of this feeling of anxiousness and time speeding up over the past 5 to 10 years, I suppose. But the women that I had talked to on these dating apps were not at all looking for anything serious. And it was a complete waste of my time. Complete waste of time. First of all, it's superficial, it's fake. And if you're someone who really has any appreciation or self-respect, I'll put it that way, you're probably not going to take part in these things. You are probably not going to make an account, make a profile. And I have people even to this day who will kind of tell me about trying out dating apps and I just tell them directly how I feel about them. I refuse. I don't want to take part in them. Like I said, I dabbled with them when I was younger. And when it comes to even this idea that men should be on dating apps because at the times, just because it's what's popular doesn't mean you should participate in it. Doesn't mean that it's not destructive and detrimental and a waste of time. Now, not only do I think men shouldn't be on them, but you look at what it's done to a lot of women, quite frankly, to modern women. And I want to say something too. This term modern woman, right? When I say modern woman, a modern woman is the kind of one that is the woman that would be on a dating app, wasting men's time, the ghosting, the flaking, these kind of games and antics where you match with a person. And if they show mutual interest, you're going to push back. And not to even mention if they show more interest, then you're going to be out the door. But this kind of game of cat and mouse, these are the kind of antics that so many men are fed up, they're done with. But when I say modern woman versus, if you want to call it traditional woman, or just a woman who is more respectable, I'll put it that way. A perfect forefront example of that, and I talked about this a number of months ago, I think in a video, where there was a video I saw that took place in a mall. And it was a gentleman who was there who had those glasses with a camera on him. And he went up to a woman and, he was very polite about it, but approached her. And without her even being able to say anything, her friend jumps in and starts ridiculing the guy, starts insulting the guy. Now, while that's all going on in this mall, in the mall food court, a woman from behind the counter goes and breaks the whole thing up and is on the guy's side and says, well, no wonder men aren't approaching women nowadays. And I would say that right there is a, forefront example of the difference between a modern woman and a woman who is more, I guess, respectable, right? But quite frankly, and especially Gen Z and Millennial, an overwhelming majority of them are taking part in this kind of stuff. I'm going to say it like it is. Not having dating apps or social media, I would say, is a green flag. But most of them are on these things, even ones that meet guys outside of dating apps. They still have them on their phone, I've seen in some cases. And the success rate, if I had to imagine, is pretty close to zero if it's going to lead to marriage or anything serious. I know one person in particular who met a woman on a dating app, and I've actually never met her personally. We reconnected recently. He was a best friend of mine, growing up. But they ended up getting married, and got married not in a conventional way, no contract, no big ceremony, which with the affordability in this city, I think it makes sense, because I've heard some of these venues and throwing a big marriage and having all these family and friends there, and people you probably don't even know, quite frankly, really are upwards of tens of thousands of dollars I've heard of. So it makes a lot of sense. Didn't buy her a fancy ring, didn't spend thousands of dollars on a ring for her. Now, I would say that sounds like, to me, someone who I would hope it leads to a good marriage with him. I hope so. Like I said, he's a close friend of mine. But you look at that, and then you compare it to women who want to hold a phone in one hand and an overpriced cup of coffee in the other, all while not being able to uphold any form of loyalty, any form of decency or support, or quite frankly, any compatibility with a relationship. Because I think most men nowadays, even the ones that have opted out of dating, even the ones that don't see prospect for relationships, people I talk to on a, quite frankly, regular basis, they are all for family. They're all for fatherhood. They're all for that kind of stuff. But they're not for divorce. They're not for custody battles. They're not for having their time wasted and losing focus on their mission and purpose. So if a woman is not going to provide with those kind of things, then why would you waste your time? That is why so many men are opting out. It's not because they need to level up and are falling behind. That's not the case at all. Are there some men who perhaps are in positions, like I myself, I would say the other thing too, when I was using these dating apps, I was at a bit of a rock bottom. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life or myself. I was out of high school and I wasn't going to college. I wasn't working towards a career. And there are many men who, they work out of those situations. But there are also men who, let's say they get with a woman who is with them for what they can provide them financially speaking, the superficial stuff perhaps. I've known men who go that route. They go straight to college and they get good jobs. And a lot of them in particular, during the big tech boom, they got jobs and they got rather degrees with software engineering stuff, with computer science. Many of whom I know have been out of work for a number of months, even a number of years, because of the layoffs, because of the boom of AI. So you're telling me if a woman's with a guy like that, and let's say there is some kind of financial hardship, then what, are they going to leave him? Because that's not genuine connection. That is not genuine connection. Like I mentioned, with when couples used to have interests in athletics and other stuff, having a connection with a person, that's not genuine. That is why good men, that is why men who are just authentic, decent men want nothing to do with this anymore. And, in other kind of case, I want to say something like this too. When it comes to loyalty, loyalty isn't what you say when things are going good. It's not what you say when things are going easy. That's not loyalty. That's temporary. That is purely temporary. And, I think a lot of men fall into this trap where maybe they get on these dating apps because they think that they're, again, more social media pressure, societal stuff, thinking that their self-worth is based on how many women they have been with, which is absolutely not the case. I saw a really good, it was a side-by-side image of actually the crocodile hunter. And I was a big fan of his when I was younger. I loved watching that channel. He was on Animal Planet. It was very sad to hear about his passing. But it was a picture of him with his family, with his wife, with his kids. And on the other hand was a picture of a guy who was at a nightclub, which that's the other thing I'll say too. I see women who will make dating app profiles. I've heard of that rather. And they'll post things in raves and nightclubs. Like that isn't an automatic red flag and disqualifying you from any self-respecting man wanting to take you seriously. But nonetheless, seeing an image of a guy who was in a nightclub with drinks and women around him, one of those two is respectable, what a man should be focusing on. I'll tell you what, it's not the latter. It's not the latter. So, and I think it's something men grow out of. I do. I think it's, like I said, that's the mindset I was in when I was, 20, 21, when I didn't know any better. When I really, and I'll be upfront in saying this, didn't have the discernment. That is why it is so important to have the discernment. If you're someone who decides you want to date, it's up to you. But I would say this, don't use dating apps. Don't waste your time on dating apps because you are not going to find, really, quite frankly, a connection in the first place. You're not going to. I would say that at the bare minimum. Now, I wouldn't at all lose focus on my mission and purpose in life. We've all known the guy like this, right? Who gets with a woman or starts talking to a girl and stops hanging out with their friends who they've known for some decades, even in some cases. Stop spending time with family. Even I've seen in some cases stop showing up or showing up late to work. You do not want to be that guy. Not at all. And if a woman is going to demand that much from you, then you just have to walk away. You have to walk away. There's really no way around it. But, when I see these kind of dating apps and the stuff going on there, it's only going to make men double down and want, quite frankly, nothing to do with them. And let's remember this too. Dating apps, they're not at all social. Like people might think it's easier. That's, I know, kind of what it was marketed as to me, right? That it was easier. It was the easier option. You don't need to go and talk to a girl in person or anything like that. But ultimately, it is the complete opposite of social. It's antisocial. It's antisocial. And they say this too, which again, I think this is part of why so many men are done with, aren't approaching women in more than just dating apps. I used to hear this saying, I'm sure you all heard this at some point, saying that the worst thing that she could say is no, right? I haven't heard that one in a while. I don't know about you guys, but the kind of just ridicule and humiliation that I've heard of women doing through dating apps, through social media, some other app or website I heard of where they will, try to expose so-called guys, whether it's ex-boyfriends, whether it's guys that try to talk them on dating apps. That is one of many reasons why a lot of men are they just don't care anymore. They don't. It's not even that they're angry. They're just kind of indifferent. They're like, okay, if I'm going to deal with ridicule and disrespect and such. I'm just going to focus on the things that I need to focus on. Why would I put myself in that kind of position, right? There's no reason to do that. So, it's just one of the many reasons why men feel the way they do. But as always, guys, I appreciate you for taking the time to watch the video. And I will say this, it's really telling that is so-called the times that we're at. And, I remember when I was a kid, you did have, I don't know if it was like, you had a couple of them they were on the computer. This is before smartphones. That people would use to match. It was mostly adults on there, like people who were upwards in their late 30s and 40s. But the fact that it's become so prominent now and played such a role in our daily lives, I think is really telling. Now, take what you will with that, but again, guys, I appreciate you for viewing the video. Hope you guys have a good one. Thank you.